You may think it's strange to go to a channel that's dedicated to protecting or defending freedom of speech on YouTube and to see a video that's about how far you can take freedom of speech, where the limits are to freedom of speech. But I think it is important that if you are going to defend freedom of speech, if you're going to, stand up for freedom of speech on a site like this, that you should have a clear understanding of what it is you are defending, and also a clear understanding what is realistic with regards to defending something like freedom of speech. And therefore it is very important that we understand exactly what we are defending. So let's have a look at freedom of speech. I think the first thing we need to do is go back to a basic understanding of what it is that we are defending. And in that regard, I want to impress on you that, in my opinion anyway, freedom of speech might be better called something like freedom of expression. And in that regard, what it actually means is that freedom of speech should be the freedom to express your own identity, who you are. And of course, as part of that, it means the ability to express your opinions about certain things. That is what should be covered under freedom of speech, and I think that we can be adamant there that there can be absolutely no restrictions whatsoever. You should be entitled to express who you are, your identity, and your opinions without any limitations whatsoever. But other than that, freedom of speech isn't as clear-cut as that. We can all think of several examples of where you simply cannot say whatever the hell you like under any circumstances. And I would say there are a number of different ways to look at that. The first one is that you must always remember that your freedom of expression, your freedom to say what you want to say, can never, under any circumstances, oblige anybody else to listen. You have the right to express yourself. You cannot force somebody else to listen to what you have to say. And that, in the context of a site like this, for example, sets a clear limitation. You, for example, can use your own channel to express what you think about another YouTuber. That is your right. You do not have the right to post that as a video response on their channel. You do not have the right to harass them over it, to keep pestering and to keep pushing them saying, watch this, watch this, watch this. And the other person has a perfect right to say, I am not interested in what you want to say, and hit that block button. That is a very clear example of what I was just talking about. So if somebody blocks you, don't sit there talking about how your freedom of speech has been affected, because it hasn't. If somebody blocks you and you are, as the phrase goes, butthurt about that, use your own freedom of speech to complain about it on your own channel. The second thing that cannot be covered under freedom of speech is information. And that is something that a lot of people might find very strange at first, very hard to understand. But information is not covered under freedom of expression, under freedom of speech. And if you start thinking about it, you will start understanding why. For example, take a very simple example where the information that you are presenting in what you say is actually false. If this is information about somebody else, this can be slanderous. This can be defamatory statements. You can be saying something about somebody else that can be libelous. And you can be sued. You can be made to pay for what you said. And therefore, if you think about it, that means that you never had the right to say it in the first place. You have to be very careful when you present any statement of fact about another person. because that person might turn around and might sue you for it. And they have every right to do so. That's one example. The other example where false information can be restricted is if you present information that is not only false, but in doing so you might endanger people. The perfect example of that is of course the one that people very often come up with, is the one about shouting fire in a cinema. You're not allowed to do that. Why? Because the information is false. It is able, it's possible by presenting that information, by shouting it into the cinema, to cause a panic, and that can cause to hurt, can cause to injury, and so on, even death. That's why you cannot do that. Even information that is actually factually correct may not be free for you to divulge. A very good example again here on YouTube is what is called doc dropping. You have information about a person's real name and address. You are not entitled to present that on this site. If you do so, your account can and should be terminated, because you are divulging information that you have no right to divulge. And another good example of information is where correct information could actually cause harm, or where information is in fact classified. All these are examples of information that you are not allowed to share. Information basically is not covered by freedom of speech. That doesn't mean that you can never present any information. Of course you can. But you always have to be careful when doing so, because it is not covered under free speech, and if there's any reason to, you can be held liable for the information that you present. At the very least, that is something that you need to keep in mind. And finally, there is an example of something that you cannot say when you are in actual fact being threatening. When you are threatening somebody with harm, when you are when you are bullying, when you are harassing, and so on and so forth. Again, you cross the line into territory where you cannot go with freedom of speech. Those are the three examples that I can think of. There may be some others, but basically I think that if you recognize that when it comes to freedom of speech, what is really covered is the freedom to express yourself and your opinions, and pretty much basically nothing else, then you can't go wrong. Just keep that in mind.